Hi, my name is Melissa, and you are listening to the Purple Podcast.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today on another edition of the Purple Podcast from GELLIFY. We're continuing our series based on that dirty word failure. And joining me in the studio today is a fellow Australian, I'm excited to add. I've known Melissa personally for quite a while now. We've run in the same circles for a number of years, both professionally and within those Australian circles as well, I would say. But Melissa, you are a leader of corporate loyalty platforms, working for one of the leading luxury fashion groups in region. Firstly, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Failure. It's a dirty word.
The F word.
The F word. Look, we've talked about it many times on this podcast around the fact that it is a dirty word in region. Companies don't seem to accept it. Individuals don't seem to like it. There's many variations on the term. We personally are of an opinion that there are types of failure, right? There's good failure and there's bad failure. And one of the best ways to learn about failure is to deep dive people's little secrets, the things that they've failed on the most, because we learn more from failure, which is basically the hypothesis of our conversation. So with that in mind, I'd love for you to talk to me about failure, a personal failure from your corporate and innovative journey.
I mean, now as I've gotten older and wiser, I feel failure, as much as of a cliche as it is 100% part of my growth now. I was referring earlier in the chat off camera, it's this, when you're younger, it's this delicate dance between ego and soul, in that the failure is just directly in competition with the ego and the egoic agenda. And, that can overtake everything. On the flip side, though, when you're in the middle of something that you don't know as failure, and when you're deep in it, it's incredibly hard to see the opportunities that come from that and the richness and the growth.
It doesn't feel like it at the time.
No. So it's only when you're on the other side and you've come through it and you're like, wow, I'm still here, I'm still breathing, I've learnt so much, that you can really appreciate the richness that comes from the failure, or whatever you want to call it, whatever term. But I've had so many, I've got failures or things that haven't gone so right or wrong, and particularly in context of, my professional career, big and small, etc. But particularly one of my roles working in a startup within a massive family conglomerate was a pivot that was very exciting. But again, the failure came from not aligning. The failure came from overthinking. The failure came from trying to be too big, too quick, do too many innovative things. And, they say crawl, walk, run.
Yep.
We went straight into sprinting. So when you're on the flip side of that, it's like, okay.
Did it feel right at the time, though?
No.
Okay.
No. And that's the thing. I mean, again, you've got to listen to your gut.
Yeah.
And I always say, if you're comfortable in what's right and what's wrong, particularly when you're in a team environment and you are working with multidisciplines in a startup, it's just all hands on deck. But innately, if something doesn't feel right or the process is wrong, but again, in a startup, it's encouraged to speak up, but then also to go with the flow. It's this weird dichotomy of, have a voice, raise your concerns, but sometimes you're running so fast, it's really hard to put the handbrake on.
Especially when it's a startup within a corporate context as well.
Exactly. So it's a really strange place to be, but particularly, you know, with a conglomerate, and this example that's in my mind is we didn't think about the operations of this particular app.
Okay.
And this particular technology we're putting in. It looked great. It presented well on a PowerPoint. The demo was amazing. Everything was just on point. It was like, I always say it's like the furniture was just beautiful, but the house itself, it had the most rickety walls and the rickety roof. And so when it came time to implement it, it just didn't work.
House of Cards.
House of Cards. So it was an incredibly big lesson to go, even though something can look amazing and it presents well and it seems like a good idea, if you can't execute it and if you can't put it into operations, then what's the point?
Yeah. How did you get yourself out of that? Did you get yourself out of it?
Well, we did, but again, it was you know, and this again was part of my learning and working with particular consultants, in that the gut and the I told you so mentality that I also very arrogantly had. I'm like, I knew this, but it was on me because I didn't speak up loudly enough. Again, because I got quite swept up that you're going at such a pace that sometimes it's hard to be like, to even though have trust and confidence in your voice, and then when you are talking, what you say matters, because I was relatively new in terms of this role and this space, and even working with these consultants, I didn't feel quite smart enough. I didn't feel like what I had to say matters. But I, again, as I said before, in my gut, I knew that we were going down a path that just wasn't going to be able to be executable.
Yeah.
And so what did we have to do? We had to backtrack. And of course, we got delayed for the right reasons. We had to go cap in hand to the board and say, look, we need to fix some things. We need to do re-engagement with the brands. But I think even being honest about that, though, and saying, look, things didn't work out exactly how we'd planned in terms of timelines, deadlines, expectations, etc., but we want to get it right.
Yeah.
I think that was a massive departure as well from a corporate culture to put your hands up and go, look.
Do you think it brought the team closer together?
Definitely. I mean, some people, yes. Other people in the team were like, look, this is not really worth our while.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but I also got to see behaviours that I liked from some of my team members, in terms of stepping up and going, okay, let's see it, solve it, let's fix the problem. And then there was also some other people, and initially it was myself too, going, I told you this would never work.
Yeah.
I told you that this wasn't going to work and this was the wrong path. And then even hearing other people being negative about it instead of being solution focused, that also opened my eyes to go, okay, this is a growth moment, because it's not coming across how you intended it to.
And how did the corporate side react to this? Was there an acceptance of, okay, we've gone down this path, we need to shore up everything before we move forward to make sure that this operates correctly? We understand, we'll give you that roadmap. Or was it like, you know, explosions, red, kind of warnings all over the place, and it wasn't taken very well?
No, it's lucky enough that we were able to flag quickly enough that we were going to be off track, and for the right reasons, though, that it's about the customer at the end of the day, that it's about our brand partners, that we needed to make sure that the experience was right and that nothing was broken and the content was good, the back end was right. So we were lucky enough that honesty, I think, set us aside, but we were acutely aware, though, that time is money. We need to launch. There's revenue. Yeah. It's part of the bigger transformation agenda. But again, we weren't going to be given a second chance.
You can fail once, but that's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, what were the lessons learned, and how do we make sure that this doesn't happen again? Some people exited the project as well, and some new blood inserted. But again, when you're in those moments, on the other side, you can look back and go, haha. But when I was in it, It was
When there's a little bit of distance, it's much easier to reflect on this, right?
absolutely,
But when you're in
and
it.
it was incredibly stressful at the time.
Yeah.
In terms of the expectations, and there was a lot of people. Sometimes in conglomerates, it's, a battle of divisions expecting us to fail and not wanting to help us on our journey of transformation. So there was that added pressure on top as well. But we're incredibly lucky that we're given the opportunity to push back the dates, push back everything, and then launch the product, which was just fabulous.
Do you think that because the startup culture is generally this concept of fail fast, right? Yes, you can fail, but you pivot and all of these kind of wonderful buzzwords. Do you think that approach can really manifest itself in a corporate environment when it comes to innovation? Do you think you can have that mentality? Because you were like, okay, we're caught up in this, we're moving forward at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Do you think those two approaches can coexist in a corporate environment, have that startup ethos, as well as kind of have that corporate structure and control?
Short answer, yes. And why is because now, at the time again, the governance and compliance and discipline that you need and you can lean on from a conglomerate provides such a framework for a startup. But it's a really delicate dance between compliance and governance and having a structure in place that's not a handbrake, but just gives you guardrails.
Okay.
So what I mean by that, I've noticed in some startups that I've worked on, is they're so obsessed with what I call the teaspoon factor. What are the teaspoons like? What are our dish towels like? What does the rug look like? But they don't have a solid roof.
Yeah.
They don't have a floor, but they've got the best teaspoons you've ever seen.
Yeah.
So I think that's where the conglomerate part provided a really safe framework.
Yeah.
But then I think even the culture now, particularly in this region, is about controlled failure, controlled risks. And, if you're making smart failures, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we want.
Yeah. So, I always in the back of my head have a failure bank.
Yep.
So I allow myself 3 or 4 failures minimum a year.
I love that.
And what's going to happen? Nothing. You've tried something. Even in my current role today, I've had a failure. It didn't work out how I anticipated in terms of anything, in terms of results, output, outcomes. I'm like, okay, there's one for the failure bank.
But as long as you can take something from that, right? As long as you can learn from it.
100%. And that was the immediate thing. What would I not do? What would I do? Would I do it again? Maybe I would.
So,
but I think, back to make sure I answer your question, is that the startup though, again, sometimes though, the other thing I observed as well, because I've been doing this for quite some time, is you can get caught up in your own hype with the startup, and then it's like a startup, we need to do this, and a startup, we need to do that. And we got caught up also with the startup of stand-ups and meetings and more collaboration, and everybody's involved, etc. So you're so busy having meetings as well. It was a meeting about a meeting, and then because again the startup culture is fail fast and everyone's hands-on, etc. That also meant everyone felt they had a say.
Okay, interesting, yeah.
Which was also a handbrake in itself too, because everybody felt that they could have a say and that their opinion and collaboration, but with that it was almost paralyzing as well.
Yeah.
That at some point we just had to make a decision. We're going to go with this particular thing, right or wrong. We'll go in this direction, and it wasn't management by committee. So that was also a massive behaviour from the startup that I also observed as well. Interesting.
So, I mean, it sounds like there's loads of kind of learnings and ways of working and things that came out of this. If you had to kind of do your time again, and you were at the beginning of that process, and you were armed with the knowledge that you have now, the benefit of hindsight, that period of kind of objectivity, and I'm away from this situation now, what would you do differently? What would you say differently? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Definitely from a personal point of view, I would have, even taking the learnings now, I would have approached it differently very much about understanding, because I was being challenged, right? And again, that egoic agenda makes you immediately become defensive.
Yeah.
And so when you're positioned in a startup with a new way of working, new ideas, and new everything, and pushing the boundaries, that can push your comfort zone from the safety net of a conglomerate.
Yeah.
And a safety net of, because I've worked for some of the biggest companies in the world, been incredibly lucky to have a career like I've had. But again, the best thing but the worst thing about these massive companies is that they have a very structured approach. It's very finance, compliance, audit driven,
Yep.
with a sprinkling of creativity along the way. But you get automatically sometimes on the back foot to go, no, that's never going to work.
That's the default.
Yeah, your default is like guilty until proven innocent.
Yeah.
And if I could go back, and this is what I try to do in my new adventure, is have a much more open mind. Definitely hearing more people out. Because a tendency to default, particularly with a conglomerate, is you go straight to the budget, you go straight to the returns, you go straight to your comfort zone of what you know. And sometimes, you need to move past those to get the true...
It's the empathetic or qualitative feedback as well, not just the quantitative, what's the numbers saying. Yeah.
And so I would 100% would take it a little bit more open-minded. As said, the learning is now. I try to do that in my new role with my team, and to do things openly, challenge as well. And I also now in hindsight as well, we're working with some of the biggest professional consultants in the world, and now I'm on the other side of it. The discipline with working with them as well has shaped me in a way too that I didn't appreciate at the time. I was being challenged constantly every day. And now, again, I always talk about on the other side, I can see the growth of that. But when I was in it...
Yeah. No one likes being questioned all the time.
No, but it was questioned, challenged. Why? And again, I keep defaulting this egoic agenda. I just defaulted to, I'm not good enough. I don't deserve to be here, but I do know what I'm doing. And so that can translate to being defensive, if I'm brutally honest. And that defensiveness is not a comfortable place that I want to be in, but it became my default at times. And so when I had an open and honest conversation with my manager at the time, I said, look, to get the best out of me, I need you, please, to be in this particular way, and I need you to be more supportive and give me this kind of level of support, et cetera, et cetera. And he was amazing, and he went, okay, hear what you're saying. And I said, have you got any feedback for me? And he said, I need you to be less defensive, not so many words. And I was like, wow, you're right. You're 100% right.
Yep.
And normally, again, my default would be like, no, you're wrong. But I took it.
I'm very much not being defensive.
Exactly. What do you mean, huh? And so even that in itself shows from the beginning to the end, when you have these people whose job it is, because the startup culture is just picking everything apart to make sure it's the most effective way you can do things, because there is a lot at risk, would not be an experience that I'd change for the world now, but in it, it's hard.
Yeah. Very good. Wow. Okay. So there is a lot to digest there in terms of understanding, being open, having that capability to provide an environment where people can fail and learn from it. Having that startup ability or mentality within a corporate environment is always going to be challenging. I could talk to you about this for hours, and I probably will off the camera. But we only have a short amount of time today. I want to thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Not a
It's such a great chat.
Super interesting.
Thank you.
You.